Hello, everybody. I'm Pete Wright, and today on Navigating Change, we bring you a conversation about finding your calling. Howard Teibel and I had a chance to sit down and reflect a bit and ask each other some important questions that center on this one key topic. Where do you want to make an impact in the world? Now, our history has led us to this point in our lives, but what does it mean to lead a life of contribution? It's a little bit of a different kind of show today, so we invite you to settle back, relax, reflect, and enjoy. Welcome to Navigating Change, the podcast from Howard's back porch.
Nice. The podcast with Pete Wright all the way from Portland, Oregon.
That's right. That's right.
New York State at the Chautauqua Institution with me.
How is your Chautauqua season so far? This is sort of a perennial thing that we do here, talking about Chautauqua from Chautauqua.
Couple of amazing lectures.
What have you learned?
Oh, George Kemble.
Yeah, design thinking, George Kemble.
Ready?
President of the D School.
I say 1, you say 2, I say 3, you say 1. That was an amazing way of showing failure.
Do you want to describe it? Just take a minute. It's your big learning from Chautauqua this year that people deserve to know.
So basically, he had people. He modeled this with his son on stage. George Kemble is one of the executive directors of the D School at Stanford. And he said, one of the things we have to get more comfortable with is this idea of failure. So he had his partner stand up, and all you do is you say 1, your partner says 2, you say 3, then your partner says 1, then you say 2, and you accelerate this, and you end up messing up.
A lot.
Yeah. And then he had us stop and he had us reflect on what the experience was like messing up. The first thing they said was they would laugh, like this emotional release of laughter, followed by this awareness of embarrassment. And he talked about, in all the times he's done this, years and years, no matter what culture it is, people's bodies even turn away from each other. It's like there's this sense of, oh my God, I just failed. He had us then do it again after pointing this out, and it was snap 2, then you say 3, then the other person snaps.
So the 1 is supplanted by a snap, replaced.
And what was amazing about the second time through is that now that we were aware that we have this tendency towards negativity around failure, it was so much easier because he also had us, if we failed, he had us raise our hands in jubilation
and say, ta-da,
ta-da. And I was so much more effective with my partner the second time through.
Once we could laugh
about it. It was more
it.
fun.
Yep.
Basically, it's the fact that this idea of failure is so ingrained in us, this avoidance of failure.
Who were you doing it with? Was it another stranger that was sitting next to you?
Complete stranger, basically, when we were done, she left immediately. Like she didn't want to be. I think she was afraid of doing another exercise with me in particular.
I can relate to that. I was doing it with my wife, and I'm curious about your experience because
I would never have done it with my wife.
I can relate to that too, especially now that I've done it with I found myself. And, I've known my wife for a long time. And, we've been married 18 years, but we've been effectively together for 30. And I feel like I was more embarrassed and filled with shame, that unconscious shame, doing it with her than I would have been with somebody
a stranger.
I didn't know.
That's interesting.
Isn't that interesting? I think it's interesting when you think about how it relates to you working on a team with somebody who's a colleague and a friend, people who you've been working with for years. Yeah. Isn't it interesting to think about how we we may carry an unconscious fear of failure because of the relationship that we have with people that we know very well?
Yeah, that's a whole other level of that. That would have been a great question for him. Yeah. How is it different if you're doing this with somebody that you know versus a stranger?
Howard, we should get him on the show. Let's table this for now.
I've already put George. The word out.
He's a fantastic individual. I hope to see him here. We've got a little bit of a different kind of podcast today. We're talking about callings. Do you want to set us up? This is something you've been noodling over for a while.
So I've been thinking about purpose, as I think about the work that I do. There's all different domains. There's the domain of purpose around being a father or being a husband, and then there's purpose around work. If you step back from making a life in those different domains and you say, all right, what does it mean to have a calling? That's a really interesting question. I mean, there's people that we can look at in history and point out they had a calling. Whether it's John F. Kennedy, I think I'd say there was a sense you could tell a story about what his calling was. Or Martin Luther King, that's a really good one that has made its way through history in our culture. But then you think about Steve Jobs. Right, exactly. But then we look at the rest of us, right? The rest of us lay people.
Schmucks on a porch.
There's two right now. It's like, all right, so what does it mean to have a calling? And I think here's why I think this is relevant. And it's relevant to anybody. This happens to be a podcast for higher education leaders or people that are practicing in the space of higher education, or even independent schools, K through 12. There's having a calling to do something. I just thought of being a teacher.
Mm-hmm. Right.
One way to measure calling for being a teacher is that they're not doing it for the money. There's a reality of we grow up in the world, and then to take care of aspects of our lives, we have to make money. When those things align with things that we care about, and we can take care of the people in our lives and ourselves and do something that we love, there's a certain synthesis in this. But there's a deeper question here, because I think when we look back, if I look back 20 years from now, God willing, say, all right, did I step up to do what was meaningful to me?
Right.
That is a question we often don't ask. And I'd want people in my life, people in education, people are looking at this constant change to start asking themselves, or maybe continue asking themselves in a more deeper way, am I living a life where I look back and I'm going to say, I made a difference?
Yeah, I look at you in particular, and so many of us, right, who've been doing something in the field for many decades, coming to this question and asking, have I been doing something that aligns with my calling all these years? Am I discovering something new about what I'm doing that aligns with the influence I want to have on the world? We all have thumbs, and where we apply the pressure of our thumbs is the influence that we have, the stuff we can touch. And that does that align with what it's going to say on your tombstone?
And I would say that I'm more in that question today than ever. That discovery of what is my calling? You and I have talked about this idea of provoking the avalanche, right? If there is an avalanche coming, or if there's avalanches that will appear at different times, and I'm speaking specifically in the domain of education, what's my contribution in that space? And you could ask that if you're a college president. You can ask that if you're a trustee. You can ask that if you're a professor or administrator. What contribution am I looking to make versus getting through the day? And today I think it's harder than ever, because there are so many things that show up that in the course of our week, when we look back even on our week, I think most of it for most of us is putting out fires.
Right.
And at some point we have to decide if we're going to find a way to not let that consume us. The other thing I'll say about this, and I'm curious what you think about this, even for yourself. Mm-hmm. I think I'm settling into this idea. It's not like there's a calling that I'm going to orchestrate. It's like, okay, there it is. I found it, and now I'm going to do it. It's more like being open, being ready. Whether you like it or not, whether you agree with this or not, there's a public story out there, and I'm going to go back to George Bush too, after 9/11. There is a story that he found his presidency. In that domain of being president, he found it after 9/11. I found a certain calling. It showed up after our son passed away. Mm-hmm. And it was the synthesis of the loss with having worked and been in relationship with other men. And then 3 or 4 of us came up with this idea of Fathers Forever, sort of a place for men to come together who have experienced the death of a child. That never would have shown up if I wasn't paying attention, if I wasn't open to the idea. But it's not even like I chose it. It was there, mm-hmm. and it was like, I'm either going to shrink away from it or I'm going to dive into it.
How does your experience, and we'll say your active choice to jump into it, how does your experience there align with what you see sort of forming as your calling, as you think about this stuff, as you sort of pour yourself introspectively into this question of calling with the work you do in higher ed and the work you do to support your family and your kids. Like how are these things coming together for you? Fathers Forever, on the surface, it's a very different kind of organization than going in and working with institutions of higher education.
It's completely different.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do those things align?
Having this awareness of this idea of a purpose or a calling or whatever you want to call it is present. Yeah, one way I could say it's in the background, and what I'm doing is I'm choosing to put it in the foreground. And I think if I was in a group having this conversation, it's a pretty compelling question, right? If I say to you, Pete, what's your calling? You have to have a pause on that one, right?
Yeah.
And I would imagine if you talk to somebody who has a public calling, they might spew the thing that they have been investing in. It's a different kind of question. But I think it is a foundational question. Sometimes it shows up as, I'll work with a college president and they know that they've got another 3 years. And I'll say to them, so when you look back 10 years from now, what do you want people to be able to say? And that's sometimes called legacy, right? And that's it. For some, and this is my experience, at the Chautauqua Institution, the new president's here.
He's been on the job for 6 months.
And the previous president, towards the end, it was like the amphitheater. The new amphitheater was something that he wanted to be able to say that on his watch, he did what he could to shepherd that thing in. Right? He can look back and say that he made that happen. Calling is even bigger than that. See, those are things you do.
Yeah. The thing that sticks in my head around calling is that you see something in the world that you acknowledge needs fixing in some way, shape, or form. And a calling is a deep-seated belief that you're the person who has a responsibility to change it. Many of us see things in the world that we acknowledge need fixing. There were a lot of people who said, the amphitheater here at Chautauqua is quite literally falling over, and it is something that needs fixing. But then there are the few individuals who said, we're the ones who are responsible to caretake and to replace that thing. That's going to be our call. That would be the calling around that device, right?
So I think one way at this, one entry point to this is when you're at your best, what shows up?
Are you asking me now, or are we just talking about it?
So when you're at your best, and let's keep it in the domain of work. Like when you find yourself connected, and I'll even go so far as to say is passionate and feeling like, you know what, I just did something important and good.
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, my last full-time corporate gig, I was a director of public relations of a big company, and I found myself in a space of losing connection to the stories we were trying to tell, whether it's in the media or, it was a higher ed institution. And so it was but it was a for-profit. And so, I found myself getting more and more corporate distance from the people we were most directly impacting, right? The students in the classroom experience. So I quit. I quit because I wanted to tell stories, and I wanted to have a direct impact on the kinds of stories that help people make sense of the world as a positive place, as a good place. And in fact, when I first quit, I don't know if you remember, my very first, because you and I have been working together since the very beginning, right? I mean, really, we've been together nearly 10 years to the day. And my very first business card actually was Pete Wright, storyteller.
Right.
And I am, over the years it's evolved, and but I feel like storyteller is a moniker that has served me better than just about anything else. And in the context of this conversation of calling, for example, I just did a short film that I shared with you on a young man who who lives with autism and Down syndrome, and the impact that he has made on my life. When you ask him, when I'm at my best, it is telling his story to people who believe that, life is exhausting and hard and the world is exhausting and hard. And if there is one message that you can walk away from, seeing a story like this one that lets you remember, we've all got it pretty good, and we all have a footprint that we leave behind us.
Perspective.
Yeah. When I'm at my best, it's telling stories that help people make sense of the world as a good place. And I feel like we need that. And so here's the thing right now that's why this definition of calling had such an impact on me. Because here we are right now where there are people who believe that this world we live in is a complete disaster, right? It's a dumpster fire. And you know what? You look around and you see these stories of people all over the world who are making it better, who are putting out dumpster fires.
So
and
where are we
important.
putting it? Yeah.
So that's the thing, that I'm taking responsibility in my small way.
It's like, and I can see now with that example that if you're not fighting against that with what are the stories that inspire us?
Yeah.
The story that's almost like this wave that just keeps coming is what's wrong with the world.
Right. Go ahead and swipe LinkedIn. Go ahead and swipe up on Facebook.
And if you come from another country to America,
oh yeah,
you have an appreciation for what this country is. At the same time, if you're somebody that looks at what's going wrong with America, your whole frame is going to be looking for the negativity. And if we're going to put ourselves in that kind of positive mood, it does live in kind of those kind of powerful storytelling.
And it comes back, to bring it back to higher education. There is a narrative that we've talked about a number of times in the media around the failing higher ed system. It is not sustainable the way it is. It is, we're burning down our institutions, and our dear friend Brian Alexander, who coined the Queen's Sacrifice, his blog is just full of these stories, these really genuinely tragic stories.
Yeah, dystopian worlds.
Yeah.
And he has multiple levels of. I love that he'll give us a dystopia. He goes, "Oh, that's not even my bad one.
Yeah,
I got 4 or 5 layers much worse than that."
And I would say,
and I get despair from just his superficial stories.
Well, I have to say, because we do love Brian. He's great. He's also he's also able to pivot that into stories of great opportunity in the education economy ahead. This is just we can get mired in change, and if you're a glass half empty person, it's pretty easy to get mired in change. So what is it that's our responsibility as leaders in higher education, whether you're faculty, staff, administration, to try to make sense of the world as a positive place for growth. How do we grow?
See, what's interesting is it's so easy, and it seems in education, to put a story around that it's not as bad as people are saying. That's different from let's have a candid conversation about what's going on.
Yeah, and different than things don't need to be fixed.
Right, but come from a place of possibilities.
Yeah.
Like, what does it mean that if we put our heads together and we have the tough conversations around tenure, around enrollment, around the cost of education, around civil discourse, around diversity. These are all things that are present for us. And I agree with you. There is a lot of good work happening out there. What I want to see is more people seize on the idea that what is it that they're going after? You've settled in, and the world comes back to it when you're at your best, when you're telling a story that inspires you. And if it inspires you, it's going to likely inspire others. The people that I get to interact with in education around the country have such a diverse set of roles. We need to find more time to be asking this question: where is it I want to make an impact? When every time I ask that question of people, they find that to be, that's a great question, suggesting in some ways that they don't really have the time to think about this. We need to make more time to be in conversation with each other about what matters to us, that where we want to have an impact.
Okay, I admit it. This conversation went on much longer than he and I had anticipated. And so we're calling this part 1, and we will continue in a future episode. As always, thanks for your time and your attention. On behalf of Howard Teibel, I'm Pete Wright, and we'll catch you next time right here on Navigating Change, the podcast from Teibel Education.